Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you? Wow, this was one of those rare stories where while I was recording it, I got goosebumps on my neck and at one point my eyes watered. Do you know that feeling? That fear that begs you to look behind you, but to such a great extent that you can't even bring yourself to look. Keep that idea in mind. You'll understand soon. This story titled The Standing Tree from an Australian gentleman named E.G. Scott is an extremely disturbing story about a school and a nearby tree. Something in the nines was taking children. Be warned, this story will sit with you long after you're done listening. There are places that do not want you. I know this now with the certainty of a man who has felt it, though it took me years to understand what that feeling meant. In the mid-90s, I arrived in a small town in northern New South Wales. I will not name it specifically, and I beg of you not to try to find it. I moved to take up my first teaching position. I was 24 years old, recently qualified, and possessed of that peculiar optimism that comes from never having been tested by the world. The school sat at the end of a road that the locals called Boundary Road, but that was not its official name. It was a building of weatherboard and corrugated iron that had been standing since the 1920s, its paint peeling in the fierce summer sun, its windows foggy with age. Behind it, beyond a rusted wire fence that marked the official edge of the school grounds, lay the bush. I use that word deliberately, not forest or woodland, those tame English words that conjure images of managed corpses and walking paths. This was true bush in the Australian sense. Dense, ancient, indifferent. Scribbly gums and iron barks grew in thickets so tight that sunlight barely reached the forest floor. Lantana choked the undergrowth and impenetrable tangles, and the constant buzz of insects created a wall of sound that seemed to press against your skull. The children were forbidden from entering it. Of course, the fence was there for that purpose, though it was hardly necessary. Most of them would not go near it anyway. It was the tree that kept them away. I first noticed it during my second week. I was supervising the lunch break, watching the children scatter across the playing field like seeds thrown from a hand when I realized that none of them went near the back fence. They played in the middle of the field, clustered near the building, kicked balls along the gravel paths, but that far corner where the fence met the bush remained empty. It was as if an invisible boundary had been drawn across the grass, one that every child instinctively understood. When I asked Helen Marchetti, the 3-year teacher who had been at the school for 15 years, she laughed. Like when you do, when you're trying to dismiss something that you don't want to discuss. "Oh, that's just the tree," she said. "The kids always have avoided it." Probably something their parents told them. "What tree exactly?" She pointed with her chin. That Australian gesture that manages to be both precise and dismissive. That big dead one just past the fence. The gray one. You can see it from here if you look. I looked, and once I saw it, I could not understand how I had failed to notice it before. It stood perhaps 20 meters beyond the fence. A massive gray eucalyptus that rose above the canopy like a finger pointed at the sky. It was dead. That much was obvious from the way its bark had fallen away in great sheets, leaving the trunk smooth and pale, almost bonicky in its nakedness. No leaves clung to its branches, no birds nested in its hollows. It simply stood there stark against the grain of the surrounding bush as if it belonged to a different world entirely. The other trees seemed to lean away from it, though I told myself that was merely an effect of the light. "It's actually technically within the school boundary," Helen continued. If you go by the original survey maps, the fence was put up in the 70s to keep the kids from wandering too far, but the trees on our side of the line just barely. She paused, and something flickered across her face. A shadow of an expression I couldn't quite read. The older teachers back when I started, they used to call it the standing tree. Capital letters like it was a proper name. Why is that? Oh, I don't know. They never told me, and I never cared to ask. That night, in my small, rented house, I lay awake thinking about the tree. It shouldn't have bothered me. I was a rational man, educated in the sciences, trained to dismiss superstition as the remnant of a less enlightened age. But there had been something in Helen's voice, something in the way she had turned away after speaking, something that stayed with me. And when I finally slept, I dreamt of standing at the base of that pale trunk, looking up into branches that spread across the sky like the veins of a bloodless hand. Over the following weeks, I learned more, not from asking directly. I quickly discovered that direct questions about the tree were met with evasion or silence, but from listening, from noticing. The groundskeeper, a taciturn man named Doug, who had worked at the school since the 1960s, would not mow the grass within 50 meters of the fence. When I asked him why, he said only that the mower didn't work well on that patch. The principal, Mrs. Davies, scheduled all outdoor events on the opposite side of the building, and the children, well, the children had their own rules. I overheard them sometimes whispering to each other in the corridors. Never look at it after dark. Don't say its name out loud. If you hear it calling, put your fingers in your ears and count to 100. Children's nonsense, I thought. Folklore that accumulates around any mysterious object passed down from older siblings and neighborhood friends and embellished with each telling. But I noticed that even the boldest of them, the ones who always pushed boundaries in every other way, they gave that corner of the field a wide berth. It was an afternoon in late April when I finally went to see it for myself. The days were growing shorter by then, the fierce summer heat giving way to the mild coolness of autumn. I had stayed late to prepare materials for the following week. I was teaching Year 5, and we were beginning a unit on Australian colonial history, and by the time I finished, the sun was already low, painting the western sky in shades of amber and rose. The school was empty. Even Doug had gone home by then, his ute crunching down the gravel drive half an hour earlier. I was alone. I don't know what compelled me. Curiosity, perhaps, or the need to prove myself that it was merely a tree, merely dead wood standing in ordinary bush. I locked my classroom, walked across the playing field, and climbed the fence. The bush closed around me immediately. One moment I was standing in open ground, the evening light still warm on my face, and the next I was in shadow, surrounded by the smell of eucalyptus and decay. The ground was thick with fallen leaves, dry and crackling beneath my feet. Ahead, I could see the pale trunk of the tree through the scrub. It was larger than I expected. Up close, the trunk was perhaps 3 meters in diameter, rising straight and smooth for 10 doaren, before splitting into those bare-reaching branches. The bark that remained, a few patches near the base, was gray and rough, covered in strange markings that might have been natural and might have been something else. I couldn't tell. The light was failing. I stood there for a moment, looking up. The sky was visible through the branches, a darkening blue, streaked with the last traces of sunset. A crow called somewhere in the distance, its cry harsh and lonely. The bush was very still, and then I heard it, a sound from the other side of the trunk, something moving, something large. It was the sound of weight shifting against bark, a slow, steady scraping, as if something were climbing or descending on the far side of the tree. I could hear it clearly in the silence. The rasp of rough skin against wood, the faint creak of dead branches, the suggestion of immense size moving with terrible patience. I should have run. Every instinct I possessed was screaming at me to turn and flee to get back over that fence and into the open ground of the playing field. But I didn't. Instead, driven by some impulse I still cannot explain, I walked around the trunk. Nothing. The far side of the tree was empty. Just more bare trunk. More fallen leaves. More bush stretching away into the gathering darkness. Whatever I had heard, if I had heard anything at all, was gone. I stood there, heart pounding, my breath coming fast. The light was almost gone now. The sky above the branches fading from blue to purple to black. I needed to leave. I needed to get back. Then the wind came. It was not a natural wind. There was no rustle in the surrounding trees or movement in the undergrowth. It came from directly above me. A cold blast of air that descended from the branches like breath, like something exhaling. It was so cold on my skin that it hurt, a chill that bit through my shirt and into my flesh. It made my skin tighten up and my eyes even watered. It smelled of old things, of deep places, of something that had been waiting there a very long time. I ran. I crossed the distance to the fence, climbed it, then walked briskly back to my car. I remember sitting in the driver's seat, my hands trembling so badly that I could barely find the keys in my pocket. There were tears streaming down my face, though I wasn't actually crying, not in any emotional sense. My body was simply reacting to something my mind was not ready for. I drove home quietly. I even forgot to turn on the radio. Usually, I'd stop at the pub for dinner, a bit of a Friday tradition, but I didn't do that. I went straight to my house, locked the door behind me, and lay in the dark until morning. I think I fell asleep, but I couldn't be sure. It was one of those nights where you open your eyes, the sun is out, and you can't tell whether you fell asleep or not. In the days that followed, I told myself I'd imagined it. The sound and that cold, the sense of presence, all of it could be explained by fatigue or suggestion. The power of accumulated rumors working on an impressionable mind. I was new to the area, still adjusting to the rhythms of rural life. I'd allowed myself to be spooked by children's stories and old wives' tales, but I did not go near the fence again. And when I looked out across the playing field during lunch breaks, watching the children at their games, I was careful not to let my gaze linger on that far corner where the gray branches reached above the canopy. Some doors once opened cannot be closed. I learned more about the tree that winter, not by seeking the knowledge out. I wanted nothing to do with it, but because knowledge has a way of finding you when you've attracted its attention. The Railway Hotel was the kind of pub that exists in every Australian country town. A broad veer, a public bar worn smooth by generations of elbows, and a cast of regulars who seemed to have grown out of the floorboards like fungi. I went there occasionally on Friday evenings, more for the company than the beer. And it was on one such evening that I found myself sitting next to old Stan Williamson. Stan claimed to have been born in the district before the First World War, which would have made him nearly 90, though he looked older still. His face was textured with deep creases, and his hands like old tree roots. Obviously a man who had spent his life clearing from farmland. He drank rum and milk. An old bushman's drink, he said. Good for the constitution. And he spoke rarely, only when he had something worth saying. I don't remember how the conversation turned to the school or to the bush behind it. Perhaps I mentioned where I worked, or he simply knew. The way everyone in small towns knows everything about everyone. But at some point, he set down his glass and looked at me with eyes that were suddenly sharp behind their old heavy lids. "You've seen it, haven't you?" "The standing tree," he said. I looked at him and swallowed. I didn't need to answer. He already knew. "The Guillory," he continued, his voice roughened by decades of tobacco and hard living. "The black fellas who lived here before us, they never would camp near that spot, never hunted there either. Wouldn't even walk through that part of the bush if they could help it. Even before the tree died, they stayed away. Do you know why that is?" Stan took a long drink, the rum and milk leaving a pale film on his upper lip. "My grandfather knew a fella," he said slowly. "An elder, one of the last who still remembered the old ways. This was back in the 20s, maybe earlier. A grandfather asked him about that tree, asked him what was wrong with it, why his mob avoided it. And the old man, he got this look on his face, like he was trying to explain something to a child, something the child couldn't possibly understand. He paused, staring into his glass as if the memory was floating there. He said something lived there, had always lived there before the white man came, before the blacks came, before anyone came, before the land was the land, he said, which didn't make any sense to my grandfather. Something in the ground that the tree grew out of, or something that grew into the tree. He couldn't explain it proper. Said their language didn't have the right words, but maybe no language did. What kind of something? Stan turned to look at me then, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Something like fear, but not exactly. It was like it had lived in his bones for 90 years, and would live there until he died. The kind you don't ask about, mate. The kind you just leave alone. He finished his drink and stood, joints cracking like dry timber. My advice? Find another school, another town. Get as far from that tree as you can, and don't ever go back. He left without another word. I stayed longer, watching the condensation run down my untouched glass, feeling the weight of those words settle over me, like earth on my coffin. I didn't ask anyone else. I put my head down, taught my classes, marked my papers, and tried to forget. The months passed, summer came again, then autumn, then winter. The tree stood unchanged on the edge of my vision, pale and patient, waiting. A new school year began. New children filled my classroom. Eager faces, looking up at me with that particular mix of hope and suspicion that 10-year-olds have for new teachers. I taught them mathematics and history and science. I watched them play in the field during lunch, their games following the same invisible boundaries that their predecessors had observed. Life went on, but beneath its surface, something was shifting. Something was coming. And when it finally arrived in 1995, it came for a child named Thomas Bennett. The morning Tommy disappeared was unremarkable in every way. It was a Thursday. I know because Thursdays were when I taught Year 5 the fundamentals of written expression, and I had prepared a lesson on descriptive language that I was rather proud of. The sky was overcast, a heavy, dark day with the clouds sitting low, and the air smelled of coming rain. The children were restless. They always seemed to be before a storm, and I had to speak sharply twice to settle them down. Tommy Bennett was not in my class. He was a Year 3 student taught by Helen Marchetti, a small boy with red hair and freckles who I only knew by sight. He had been at the school since kindergarten, the son of a mechanic and a checkout operator at the local supermarket. He was by all accounts an ordinary child. The first I heard of anything wrong was at afternoon recess. I was on playground duty, walking the perimeter of the field with a cup of lukewarm tea when I noticed Helen standing near the back fence, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. Her face was white. "Have you seen Tommy Bennett?" she asked when I approached. Her voice was pitched higher than usual. "He was here at the beginning of the break. Ryan Coulter saw him walking toward the back fence, and now I can't find him." I looked toward the fence. The bush beyond was dark beneath the overcast sky, the gray shape of the tree barely visible through the scrub. I gulped. "He can't have gone over. I said the children don't go near." "I know they don't. I know they don't." Helen's eyes were fixed on the fence. "But Ryan said he saw Tommy walking that way. Said he called out to him. But Tommy didn't turn around. He just kept walking." We searched the school first, every classroom and storeroom, every corner of the building, then the grounds, the equipment shed, the outdoor toilets, the bins behind the canteen. Mrs. Davies called an emergency assembly, lined the children up in the hall, and counted them twice. Tommy Bennett was not among them. The police arrived at 2:30. By then, the threatened rain had begun to fall, a light drizzle that would continue through the afternoon and into the evening. I watched from my classroom window as officers in blue uniforms walked the fence line, spoke into their radios, formed a search party, and entered the bush. They were out there for hours. When they emerged just before dark, their faces told us everything. They had found nothing. Not a single footprint, nor a trace of torn clothes. No tell that a child had ever passed that way. The undergrowth was undisturbed. The vent showed no marks of climbing. Thomas Bennett had simply ceased to exist. That night, the town gathered at the community hall. Parents held their children close. Volunteers organized themselves into search parties. Someone put up a large-scale map of the area, marking possible routes a lost child might have taken. Torches were distributed, whistles handed out, phone numbers exchanged. The police established a command post and set up a hotline. But I noticed that none of the local people, none of those who had lived in that town for generations, joined the parties that searched the bush behind the school. They manned the phones, made sandwiches, drove the roads, looking for any sign of movement, but they did not go into those trees. When I asked one of the older men why, he looked at me with something like pity. "You go in there at night?" he said quietly. "He might not come out." But I thought, would that not be a good reason to look for Tommy there? The search continued for 3 days. Police from the surrounding districts joined in. A helicopter searched over the bush, rotors beating the air. Dogs were brought in too, trained animals that could supposedly track a scent through any terrain. But the dogs refused to go near the fence. They whined, they paced, they pulled against their leads. Their handlers were baffled in 20 years. One of them said he had never seen animals behave that way. The school remained closed. Parents kept their children at home. The town, usually so busy with the rhythms of rural life, fell into an awful silence. On the 4th day, I went back. I don't know why. It might have been guilt. I had known about the tree. I had felt what was there, and I had said nothing. Maybe it was hope, too. The irrational belief that I might find some clue the police had missed, a trace that would bring Tommy home to his parents. But now I wonder if it was simply that the tree had called to me, had planted something in my mind during that cold encounter in April, and I was finally answering. The afternoon was mild. The sky was clear after days of rain. The school grounds were deserted, sealed off by police tape that fluttered in the breeze. I parked on the road, climbed the boundary fence at the rear of the property, and made my way across the empty playing field. The tree was waiting for me. That's how it felt, at least. As I climbed the back fence and pushed into the bush, As the shadows closed around me and the silence deepened, I had the overwhelming sense of approaching something that had been expecting me, that had always been expecting me. The undergrowth parted before my feet as if guiding me forward. The branches overhead formed a tunnel through which the pale trunk glowed like a beacon. I stopped at the base of the tree, the marks I'd noticed before. The strange patterns in the remaining bark were more visible now, clear in the afternoon light. They may have been carvings, I thought. Maybe they were scars of some ancient rituals. Or maybe it was nothing, merely the random workings of weather and time on dead wood. I looked up. The branches spread above me like a web, but nothing moved in them. Nothing waited there that I could see. I began to walk around the trunk, and I heard a sound. It was coming from above me, from high in the branches, from the place where the trunk split and the dead limbs reached for the sky. It was a wet sound, a thick, deliberate sound, the sound of something feeding. I have tried in the years since to describe what I heard in that moment, but the words fail me. The closest I can come is this. Imagine meat being pulled from a bone. Imagine the slow separation of sinew from muscle, the stretch and snap of tissue giving away, and imagine it amplified, extended, savored. Whatever was up there, it wasn't merely eating. It was enjoying itself, and there was something else beneath the sounds of consumption, a sound like breathing, slow, deep, and wet, a sound that vibrated in my chest and made my teeth chatter. I could not bring myself to look up. My body simply refused. Every muscle was locked in place, every joint frozen. I stood at the base of that dead tree with tears streaming down my face. These tears were of pure animalistic terror, and I listened to something eat what I knew in my heart was left of Tommy Bennett. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been minutes, maybe hours. Time had ceased to have meaning. All that existed to me in that moment was the sound, the endless wet crunching and tearing of flesh, and the cold certainty that if I looked up, if I saw what was up in that tree, I would never be able to unsee it. That knowing would destroy me. When I finally moved, it was not a conscious decision. My legs, fueled by instinct, simply began to carry me backward, step by shuffling step, my eyes fixed on the ground before me. I did not run. I was too afraid that running would attract its attention, would draw its gaze down from the branches to the small figure retreating through the undergrowth. I walked slowly and steadily, and I did not look back. I climbed the fence, crossed the field. I entered the school building through the side door that I knew would be unlocked. I then went to the office and picked up the phone. "There's something in the tree," I said when the police answered. My voice was calm, but detached, as if someone else were speaking through me. The big, dead tree behind the school. "You need to look in the tree. They found him the next morning." I was not there when they brought the bucket truck, nor was I there when they extended the lift into the branches. I was at home, sitting in my dark living room, staring at a TV that wasn't on. I heard about it later. Everyone in town heard about it, though no one spoke of it openly. The local newspaper ran a brief article the following week. Missing child found. The headline read, "Body of Thomas Bennett, 8, recovered in bushland behind local school." The article mentioned that the body had been found in a tree and had been identified by parents. It mentioned that the cause of death was still under investigation, though police were treating it as suspicious. It mentioned that counseling services were being made available to students and staff. What it didn't mention, what no newspaper would say, was the condition in which Tommy Bennett had been found. I learned this only later from a police officer who drank too much at the railway hotel one night and let slip more than he should have. The boy had been wedged into a hollow where two branches met some 50-1 ms above the ground. Parts of him had been removed. Others had been partially consumed. The body had been there for at least 3 days. Like something had been storing him there, the officer said, slurring his words. Like a leopard stores its kills, wedged him up there and came back when it was hungry for more. I said nothing. I didn't have anything to say. The school reopened the following week. A new fence was erected, taller and stronger than the old one, topped with barbed wire. For safety, Mrs. Davies told the parents at the emergency meeting, to keep the children from wandering into the bush. No one mentioned the tree, of course, and no one suggested it should be cut down. There was no acknowledgement by it in any official capacity that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. But the children knew. Children always know in some way. The whispers in the corridors grew more urgent, more specific, and the invisible boundary around that far corner of the field grew wider. Still, life again went on. It had to. There were lessons to teach and papers to mark, schedules to keep. The routines of the school year continued, each day following the last in the same familiar pattern. Tommy Bennett's desk was removed from Helen's classroom. His parents moved away to Sydney, some said, or maybe Brisbane. His friends grew quieter for a while, then gradually returned to their games and their laughter. Children are resilient. It's both their gift and their curse. But I was not resilient. Something had broken in me that afternoon at the base of the tree. Some necessary illusion about the nature of the world had been stripped away from me, and I could not rebuild it. I did my job. I smiled at my students. I attended staff meetings and contributed to discussions about curriculum development. But I was hollow inside, emptied out, just waiting. The tree still stood at the edge of the playing field. I could see it from my classroom window, its horrible shape above the new fence. Every time I looked at it, I heard the sounds again, the wet tearing, the slow crunch, the deep, satisfied breathing, and I knew with absolute certainty that it was only a matter of time before it happened again. Music. 2 years passed. I should have left. Every rational part of my mind told me to request a transfer, find a position in another district, but I didn't. I couldn't. The tree had its hooks in me now, and some part of me understood that running wouldn't solve the problem. Whatever had taken root in that dead trunk, could it follow me? Would it be waiting at every fence line and forest edge until I dealt with it here at its source? So I stayed. I taught. I watched the children carefully, taking note of any who strayed too close to the boundary, ready to intervene at the slightest hint of danger. I became known as strict, perhaps even harsh, the teacher who would not tolerate any deviation from the rules, the one who spoke sharply to anyone who approached the back fence. The other staff thought I was still processing what had happened to Tommy, and they weren't entirely wrong. In 1997, I was assigned a new class, Year 6, the oldest students in the school on the cusp of high school and independence. Among them were 2 boys who would test every limit I'd ever set. Their names were Daniel Croft and Samuel Murray. They'd been friends since kindergarten. They had that bond that forms between kids who recognize something similar in each other. In this case, a shared contempt for authority and a bottomless appetite for trouble. They weren't cruel boys, not malicious. They simply didn't believe that rules applied to them. I recognized the type immediately. I'd taught dozens like them over the years. Normally, these kinds of students would respond well to firm boundaries and clear consequences. You establish your authority early, demonstrate that you will not be manipulated, and eventually reach an understanding. Daniel and Sam, however, they were different. They seemed to take my strictness as a personal challenge. The conflict began in the second week of term when I caught them sneaking toward the back fence during lunch break. They were about 20 hours from it, far closer than any other student would venture, their eyes fixated on the gray shape of the tree, visible above the new barbed wire. Stop. They turned, their faces a blend of surprise and defiance that I'd come to expect. What do you think you're doing? I asked. Daniel, the bolder of the two, shrugged with elaborate nonchalance. Just looking, sir. Didn't know that was against the law. You know the rules. No one goes near the fence. No one goes near the bush. Go back to the main field now. Sam smirked. Is it because of the kid that got killed? Tommy, something. I felt something cold move through my chest. Go now. They went, but I saw them exchange a glance as they walked away, and I knew that this wasn't over. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Sam became increasingly fixated on the tree. They kept asking questions in class that seemed designed to provoke me about local history and indigenous legends, even unsolved crimes in the district. They whispered to other students in the corridors, spreading stories that grew more lurid with each telling. They tested my patience at every opportunity, pushing closer and closer to the boundary whenever they thought I wasn't watching. The confrontation I'd been dreading came during a history lesson in the third week of term. We were discussing the impact of European settlement on indigenous communities, a sensitive topic I always approached with care when Daniel raised his hand. Sir, what about the sacred sites, the places the Aboriginal people wouldn't go? I should have seen it coming. There were many such places, I said carefully. Some were sacred in a positive sense, ceremonial grounds, places of significance. Others were avoided for different reasons. What kind of reasons? Sam asked, and I could hear the trap being laid. Various reasons. Some places were associated with dangerous spirits, or like the tree behind the school. The classroom went silent. 24 pairs of eyes turned toward me, waiting for an answer. Daniel was smiling, the infuriating smile of a child who believes he has outmaneuvered an adult. That is not what we're discussing today, I said, keeping my voice level. But it's the same thing, isn't it? A girl named Jessica spoke up from the back row. One of the quieter students, usually not given to confrontation. My nan says the black fellas never went near that tree. Says it's been there forever, and that something bad lives in it. My dad reckons it's haunted. Another boy added, reckons. That's why Tommy Bennett died there. The tree got him. The tree did not get anyone. My voice was pointed. Tommy Bennett's death was a tragedy, and I won't have it turned into a ghost story for your entertainment. Then what did happen? Daniel leaned forward, his eyes bright. You were there, sir. You found him. Everyone knows that. So, what really happened? What did you see? The room was very still. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the distant shouts of younger children at play, the whisper of wind through the open window. And beneath it all, like a pulse, like a heartbeat, I could hear the echo of those sounds in the tree, the wet tearing, the slow crunch, the deep and joyful breath. I saw a child dead, I said quietly. I saw grief and horror and loss. That's what I saw, Daniel. That's what death looks like. It's no story. It's not an adventure. It's the end of everything that person was or could have been. And if you had any decency, any respect for Tommy or his family, you would stop treating it as entertainment. Something flicked, across Daniel's face. Shame, I hoped. Or the beginning of understanding. But Sam leaned over and whispered something in his ear, and the moment passed. What about the tree, though? Sam pressed. Jessica's Nan isn't the only one who says things about it. Everyone in town knows there's something wrong with it. Everyone knows kids aren't supposed to go near it, but no one will say why. Don't you think that's weird? Some things are better left alone, I said. That's what adults always say when they don't want to tell you the truth. No. I met his eyes, held them. That's what adults say when the truth is too dangerous for children to hear. When knowing something could put you in harm's way, there are things in this world you are not equipped to understand or to fight. That tree is one of them. And if you value your life, Samuel Murray, you will stay away from it. The bell rang. The students filed out in unusual silence, casting glances back at me as they went. Daniel and Sam were last to leave, and at the door, Daniel paused. You know what's in the tree, don't you, sir? He said. You've seen it. Get to your next class, Daniel. He smiled, infuriating me even more, but I didn't say anything, and he walked away. One afternoon, I overheard them talking to a group of younger children near the water fountain. My brother told me what really happened. Daniel was saying, the kid didn't just die. Something took him in the tree. It grabbed him and pulled him up into the branches. And that's enough. My voice cut through. The younger children scattered like startled birds, but Daniel and Sam stayed where they were. We weren't doing anything wrong, sir, Sam said. Just talking. You were scaring the younger students with ghost stories. That stops now. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. They're not ghost stories, though. Something really did happen. We talked about Tommy Bennett before. That was real. Everyone knows it. What everyone knows and what is true are not always the same thing. They rolled their eyes almost at the same time. Those kids were in sync. I should have told someone about this. Should have gone to Mrs. Davies or spoken to their parents, let someone know how obsessed they'd become with that tree. But I shook it off and I told myself that they would lose interest eventually. They're kids. Their attention would move on to other forbidden things. I was wrong. The discovery came by accident. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I assigned the class a writing exercise, a personal narrative about a place that held significance to them. Most students wrote about their homes or their grandparents' farms, their favorite swimming hall. But when I collected Daniel's paper at the end of the lesson, I noticed that it was not the assignment he had handed in. It was a note written in Sam's handwriting, folded into a tight square. Clearly, it had been passed between them during class. He had not meant to give this to me. It read, Friday night, after everyone's gone, we cut the fence and climb. Whoever chickens out first has to do the other's homework for a month. I bet there's nothing there anyway. Just some dead tree and old stories. We'll prove everyone wrong. Below it, Daniel's messier scrawl. Deal. But I want to actually climb in it. Touch the top. That's the real test. Anyone can just walk up to it. But if we climb it, we're legends. I stood at my desk, the note shaking in my hand. I felt the world tilt. Friday night was tomorrow. They were going to climb the tree tomorrow night after the staff left. After the grounds were empty, after there was no one to stop them. By then, school had ended. Both Daniel and Sam had disappeared into the crowd of departing students, and I could not find them. I went to Mrs. Davies, but she had already left for a meeting in town. I called the numbers listed in the school records, but no one answered at the Croft house, and the Murray line was engaged. I told myself I would catch them. First thing Friday morning, I would pull them aside, show them the note, and make them understand the danger they were trying to court. I could not let them go near that tree. I wouldn't let it happen again. But Friday morning came, and Daniel was absent. A stomach bug, his mother said when she called the office. He would be back on Monday. And Sam, when I tried to speak with him before class, simply looked at me with those defiant eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, sir. There's no plan. We're just mecking around. He was lying. I knew he was lying. But I had no proof beyond a confiscated note. And when I brought it to the principal, she told me I was welcome to stay after school to keep an eye out. Great. I watched Sam throughout the day, saw him watching the clock, and I felt the hour slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The night it happened was a Friday in late October. The days were growing longer again, the jacarandas blooming along the main street in cascades of purple. I'd stayed late at school as I often did, marking assignments and preparing lessons for the following week. But this time, I was not preparing lessons. Instead, I was waiting, watching the car park, hoping to catch the two before they could enact their plan. By 7:30, the school was dark and silent. No sign of the boys. I told myself that perhaps they had abandoned the plan. Perhaps Daniel's illness had been real, had kept him from the rendezvous. Perhaps Sam had come to his senses, so I waited a while longer, and still nothing happened. I drove home. I ate dinner without even tasting it, and then at 9:04, my telephone rang. It was Sarah Murray, and even before she spoke, I knew. "Have you seen Sam?" Her voice sounded worried. He was supposed to be home for dinner. I've called his friends and driven all the usual places, but Daniel Croft is missing too. His mother just rang me, said he snuck out when she thought he was in bed. No one has seen either of them since school let out. That painful cold in my chest was like a knife. I know where they are. The tree? What? Where? But I'd already hung up. I grabbed my keys and ran for the car, the notes, words burning in my mind. We cut the fence and climb. Whoever chickens out first has to do the other's homework for a month. Of course, they'd gone. The school was dark when I arrived. I parked at the front gate, leaving the engine running, and ran across the playing field. The grass was wet with dew. The air was heavy with the smell of approaching summer. And above me, the stars were cold and silent, indifferent to what was happening below. The fence had been cut. Someone had taken wire cutters to the mesh, creating a hole large enough for a child to crawl through. I squeezed through the gap, feeling the barbed wire catch at my shirt, and I plunged into the bush. The tree was ahead of me. I could see it through the scrub, and standing at its base, motionless, was a figure. Sam. He was alone. His back was to me, his head tilted upward, his body completely still. He might have been a statue carved from the same pale wood as the tree itself. He didn't react to my approach. He did not turn at the sound of my crashing footsteps. Sam. No response. I moved closer, my heart going mad, and I reached out to touch his shoulder. His skin was ice cold. Then I heard it, that sound from above, the wet rhythmic crunching, the slow tearing of meat from bones, that deep breathing that seemed so happy. It vibrated my entire skeleton. I didn't look up. I kept my eyes on poor Sam's face, his blank staring face, his eyes fixed on something that I could not see. And I wrapped my arms around his rigid body, lifting him from the ground. He was heavier than I expected, stiff and unyielding, as if his muscles had locked up in terror and refused to release. I held him against my chest and walked again. I did not run. Running would make noise. It would attract predators or a predator. So I walked painfully slow, one step at a time, while the sounds above us continued, while that cold wind began to blow from the branches, while every instinct I had screamed at me to drop the boy. The bush parted before me, and the fence appeared, the hole in its mesh a dark wound in the silver wire. I pushed through, carrying Sam still, somehow, feeling the barbed wire tear at my skin. Then I stumbled out onto the playing field. Behind me, something moved in the tree. I heard the scrape of weight shifting against wood, the creaking of branches bending. And then, carrying across the empty field like the voice of a nightmare, I heard a sound that might have been a word. It might have been a name, but it could have been nothing at all. Whatever it was, it froze my blood and made me finally, truly run across the dew-wet grass toward the lights of the school. The police found Daniel Croft's remains a day later. He was in the tree like Tommy Bennett before him, wedged into a hollow high in the branches. The official story was that he had fallen while climbing, that his injuries were consistent with impact trauma, and that Sam Murray had witnessed the accident and had been rendered catatonic with shock. Another tragedy, the papers concluded, but nothing suspicious, nothing criminal, nothing worth investigating further. I gave my statement 3 times to the local police, then to detectives from the regional command, then to some woman in a gray suit who never identified her agency. I told them exactly what had happened, how I'd found Sam, how I'd carried him out, how I'd heard sounds in the tree but had seen nothing. They wrote it all down. They thanked me for my cooperation, and I never heard from them again. Sam was taken to a psychiatric facility in Newcastle. His parents visited once, then twice, and then stopped coming. I heard later they had divorced. His mother had moved interstate, and his father had drunk himself into an early grave. Sam remained in the facility, unresponsive, unspeaking, staring at a wall that only he could see. I should have let it go. Really, I should have accepted that I had done everything I could, that 2 children were dead and 1 was destroyed, that there was nothing more to be done. The authorities had investigated. The case was closed. Life would go on. But I couldn't do that because that damn tree was still standing there. And as long as it stood, as long as whatever lived in it was still up there, more children would die. More parents would grieve, their lives destroyed. More innocent lives would be offered up to whatever ancient hunger had taken root in that place. I made my plan in the weeks that followed. It was simple, probably foolishly simple. I would return to the tree on a weekend when the school was empty. I would bring fuel and matches, and I would burn the standing tree to the ground. I knew the risks. The bush was dry. The fire danger was high. What I was planning to do was arson at best, environmental catastrophe at worst. But I'd heard the sounds, and I'd felt the cold. I'd seen what was left of Tommy Bennett and Daniel Croft, and I knew that no risk was too great if it meant ending this. Trust me. I considered chopping it down, but I don't think I'd last that long beneath a tree. Do you think whatever lived in it would let me do that? It was a Saturday afternoon. The skull was deserted, the car park empty, and the building silent. I parked on a side street, out of sight, and I walked in carefully, with a plastic container of petrol and a box of matches in my bag. The sun was hot on my shoulders. The cicadas screamed in the trees. The hole in that fence had been repaired, but I had brought wire cutters. I made a new, larger opening this time, pushing through into the bush. The undergrowth was thick after the spring rains, vines and ferns crowding the ground, but the path to the tree was clear. It always was. When I reached the trunk, I set down my bag and unscrewed the cap of the petrol container. The smell hit me immediately. My hands were steady. My mind was calm. I knew what I had to do. I began to pour. The petrol splashed against the pale bark, darkening it, running down in rivulets to pull at the base. I walked around the trunk, spreading the fuel as widely as I could. Working quickly, methodically, I listened closely to the branches above, but they were silent. The thing in the tree was asleep. Or was it waiting? Or was it watching? No, I was wrong. I heard it then, something moving on the bark, descending. I fumbled for the matches. My hands were trembling now. The calm had shattered, replaced by raw terror. I struck one match, then another, but they wouldn't catch. The heads kept crumbling against the strip. The crawling sound grew closer. I could hear the scrape of something against the wood, the slow, patient moving of something large descending the far side of that trunk. In seconds, it would round the curve of the bark. And in seconds, I would see it. A third match. Fourth. They crumbled, useless, the phosphorus turning to dust. Police don't move. The beam of a flashlight hit me full in the face. I stumbled backward, blinded, the matches scattering from my hand. Through the glare, I could see a uniformed figure, torch in one hand, the other raised in a gesture of command. Drop whatever you're holding and put your hands on your head. I dropped the empty petrol container. I raised my hands and I heard behind me the sound of something retreating up the tree, climbing back into the branches, returning to its place of waiting. The officer who arrested me was young, barely out of training. He did not understand what he had interrupted. He saw a man dousing a tree with petrol very close to school property. To him, it was attempted arson, reckless endangerment, willful destruction of property. He did not see the thing in the branches, nor did he hear the sounds descending the tree. He saw only a crime, and he did his duty. I did not resist. There was no point to. I allowed myself to be handcuffed and to be led back through the fence, placed in the back of the police car. Apparently, he had followed me when I parked on the side street. As we drove away, I looked back at the school, at the dark line of the bush behind it. And even from there, I saw its gray shape. It was still there. It would always be there. I had failed. The trial took 3 months. I was charged with attempted arson, trespass, and reckless endangerment of life. The prosecution painted me as a disturbed individual, one who had become obsessed with the deaths of children at the school where I taught, unable to accept that they had been tragic accidents. My lawyer argued diminished responsibility, citing the trauma I'd experienced, the stress of witnessing the aftermath of 2 deaths in my workplace. And the judge, he was sympathetic, or maybe pragmatic. I was sentenced to 18 months, suspended with mandatory psychological counseling. But officially, my teaching career was over. The school board terminated my employment immediately. No other district would hire me. I was a liability, a potential lawsuit waiting to happen. A man who had tried to burn down a tree near a school where children had died. It didn't matter that I'd been trying to protect those children. It didn't matter that I knew the truth. What mattered was the official record, and the official record said I was unstable. I left that town in the spring of 1998. I drove south, and eventually I settled in a coastal town where no one knew my name or my history. I took a job as an assistant manager at a restaurant chain, a job that asks nothing of you except punctuality and a willingness to follow instructions. More years passed. I grew older, and I never went back. But I never did forget. I never stopped wondering what had become of the boy I'd carried out of the bush that night. that boy who had seen what I had only heard. Unexpectedly, the answer came on an ordinary Tuesday in 2003. I was working the lunch shift, seating customers, and managing reservations when a woman approached the host stand. She was middle-aged, unremarkable, and had tired eyes. She asked for a table for one. As I led her to her seat, something about her face triggered a memory. I think it was the shape of her jaw and those brown eyes. I couldn't place why she was familiar at first. It was only when she ordered, when I saw her name on her card, that I understood. Murray. By then, she had finished her meal, and against every instinct of self-preservation, I approached her table. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, "but before you leave, are you by any chance related to a boy named Samuel Murray? He would be about 18 now." She looked up at me, and I saw the recognition dawning in her eyes. Not of me specifically. We had never met, but the question. She knew what I was asking, and she knew why. "Oh, he is my cousin's son," she said. "I've actually just been to visit him in Newcastle." "Oh, how's he doing? These days?" Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, round and round as she thought. Then she said, "He's not the same. He'll never be the same, but he's improving slowly. He started talking last year. After 6 years of silence, he finally started to speak." I swallowed. "That's good. That's very good. The strange thing is," she hesitated, probably reconsidering how much she should be sharing with a stranger. "The strange thing is what he said. His first words since after all those years of silence." I waited. He said, "It's in the tree." She looked up at me, her eyes searching my face. "Does that mean anything to you?" The doctors couldn't make sense of it, but he kept saying it over and over. "It's in the tree." My God. I'm not sure what it was about this one, but this story really freaked me out. We moved recently to a new house, and it's the first time we have a room with one of those stereotypical tree right by the bedroom window situations. Specifically, the window in my son's room. I didn't give it a second thought until reading the story, but now I've got chills, and I might check on my son while he's sleeping when I'm done here. Thank you for listening. This has been Tales from the Break Room, the podcast where I share work-related scary stories. For more, go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and search for Tales from the Break Room, or simply search EerieCast. If you need a relief from the terror, join me over at my channel, Night Watchers, where me and my friends, including Niall from On Plays, chat about nonsense. It's good fun before you dive back into something terrifying. Till next time, everyone, it's time for me to clock out, but I'll be clocking back in real soon.